11:47 at night. Three nurses had left the room crying when the sedation team approached the locked door of room 14. Inside, the blind Navy SEAL had torn out his IV, knuckles bloody, screaming that he could smell the chemicals they were forcing on him. The chief made the call, restrain him. Now. That's when the blonde rookie nurse stepped forward, hands trembling as she reached for the handle. She wasn't supposed to be on this floor. She wasn't supposed to touch him. But when her fingers brushed his wrist to check his pulse, the room went silent. The SEAL stopped breathing. "It's you," he whispered. Marcus Kane survived the Kandahar explosion that took his sight, but not what came after. Decorated Navy SEAL. 2 combat tours, the blast shredded his retinas, and his trust in anyone wearing scrubs. For 3 days he fought the VA staff, convinced they were poisoning him, certain that sleep meant death. Now, as the sedation team prepared to breach the door, the woman beside him wasn't just violating protocol. She was unlocking a decade-old secret that neither of them knew they shared. And when he reached up to touch her face, the question wasn't whether he would recognize her. It was whether she could survive remembering. His fingers found her cheekbone, traced the line of her jaw with terrifying precision. 10 years had weathered her skin, softened the angles, but the architecture remained. The tremor in her hands hadn't changed, neither had the specific pressure she applied when checking a pulse. 3 fingers, not 2, firm but not crushing, a signature she developed in combat medicine when fingers went numb from cold and adrenaline. Sarah Chen, 29 years old. 6 months out of nursing school. Working the night shift on Ward 4 because no one else wanted the aggressive patient in room 14. Marcus Kane, 34. 12 years in the teams. The Kandahar blast had taken his sight on March 15, 2014, but that wasn't the date that mattered, October 3, 2014. The night a field hospital tent shook with rotor wash while a young combat medic held his hand through 6 hours of surgery that removed 17 pieces of shrapnel from his torso. He had never seen her face. The bandages covered his eyes even then, fresh burns requiring sterile darkness. But he had felt her. Every adjustment of her grip, every time she squeezed back when the pain became unbearable. The slight tremor that ran through her fingers when the generator flickered and she thought they might lose power for the ventilator. Sarah stepped back, breaking contact. The sedation team paused at the door, confused by the sudden silence. She stared at the man on the bed. The scar tissue visible above his hospital gown. The way his head tracked her movement with uncanny accuracy despite the empty eyes. "You don't remember," he said. "It wasn't a question. I wasn't there," she whispered. "I was civilian by then. Pediatric ward in Baltimore." "Your hands don't lie," he said. The left index finger, slight callus on the second joint, from the M9 tourniquet windlass. "You fidgeted with it when you were nervous. I heard the plastic click against your wedding ring." Sarah's hand flew to her left hand. The callus was there, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. She hadn't worn a wedding ring in 8 years, hadn't held a weapon in 10. Outside the door, the chief of medicine cleared his throat. "Nurse Chen." "We need to proceed." Marcus turned his head toward the voice. Suddenly the predator again, not the wounded man. "Touch me with that needle and I'll break your arm before the plunger depresses." The chief hesitated. Marcus had already sent 2 orderlies to the emergency room with dislocated shoulders. The VA had flagged him as non-compliant, high risk, potentially requiring transfer to the psychiatric ward for involuntary commitment. Sarah looked between them. The man who knew impossible things about her. The career she was about to destroy by defying a direct order. She made her choice. "Leave us," she said. The chief stared. "Excuse me." "Leave the room. Close the door. Give me 10 minutes. You're not authorized to. I'm the only one he's let touch him in 72 hours. She snapped. "You want him sedated? Restrained? Locked in a padded room? Or do you want him treated?" The chief's jaw worked. 10 minutes. Then we do this my way." The door clicked shut. Marcus relaxed fractionally, his shoulders dropping from their combat-ready tension. The sound of the latch had told him they were alone. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "Now they'll fire you, probably," she admitted. "Why?" "Because you're right," she said. October 3rd, 2014. I was Sarah Mitchell then. Combat Medic 455th Expeditionary Medical Group, and I held your hand while Dr. Harrison removed 17 pieces of shrapnel from your liver and spleen. I thought you died on the evacuation flight. I did, he said, flatlined twice. But I came back. And I spent 10 years trying to find the woman with the trembling hands, who wouldn't let me go. The cardiac monitor beside his bed suddenly flatlined. Not because his heart had stopped, but because Sarah had reached over and yanked the leads from his chest. The alarm died with a whimper. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Getting you out of here," she said. "Because if you really remember that night, then you remember what I whispered to you when they wheeled you to the chopper. And you know why we can never let them know who I really am." Marcus went still. The words came back to him through a decade of morphine and darkness, the warning she had breathed into his ear when the stretcher lifted. "They're coming for the medics. Don't tell them my name." Now in the sterile VA room, he understood. The trembling wasn't just adrenaline. It was fear, and it had followed her for 10 years. She stepped back from the window, her hand trembling as she reached for the light switch, plunging the room into darkness. "Then let me tell you why I really left the military," she whispered. Sarah moved to the corner of the room, keeping her voice below the hum of the ventilation system. After Kandahar, 3 combat medics died in supposed accidents within 6 months: car crash in Germany, drowning in Virginia Beach, training exercise gone wrong at Fort Bragg. All of them worked that same night in the field hospital. All of them treated patients from your unit. Marcus sat up slowly, ignoring the pain from his healing wounds. "You're saying someone targeted medical staff. I'm saying the IED that took your site was not random," she said. "And the people who built it do not want witnesses who can identify the blast pattern." She explained quickly, urgently, painting a picture of that October night that Marcus had never seen. The field hospital had been treating a high-value prisoner alongside the SEALs, a defector from a private military contractor, with evidence of illegal arms trafficking in the tribal regions. Someone had ensured the extraction convoy never made it back to base. The explosion was meant to eliminate the prisoner, but it had caught Marcus's patrol instead, turning a surgical strike into a mass casualty event. "Why medics?" Marcus asked. "Because we document everything," Sarah said. "Injury patterns, shrapnel types, wound channels. We know the difference between a Taliban pressure plate and a shaped charge manufactured in a Western facility. I photographed your injuries before surgery. I still have those images." Marcus went rigid. "You kept classified medical photos for 10 years? "I kept evidence," she corrected. "Because 3 days after your evacuation, 2 men in civilian clothes visited the hospital. They were not military intelligence. They asked about the medic who worked on the American prisoners. That is what they called you. Prisoners, not patients, not soldiers, prisoners of a war that did not officially exist." She pulled an object from her pocket, not a phone, but an old digital camera, the kind issued to field medics in 2014. "I transferred the files before I disappeared. Original memory card is buried in a safety deposit box in Delaware, but I looked at those photos last month. Marcus, the shrapnel I pulled from your abdomen was not military grade. It was commercial, mining equipment, the kind used to clear tunnels in places where the United States military does not officially operate." The room seemed to contract. Marcus had spent 10 years believing he was a casualty of enemy action, a statistic in the war on terror. Now Sarah was suggesting friendly fire did not begin to cover it. He was a victim of domestic treason. Who? He demanded. "The contractor called themselves Obsidian Shield," she said. "And they are not just mercenaries. They have contracts with the VA, with this hospital, with the psychiatric evaluation unit that wants to transfer you tomorrow morning." The implications crashed over him like cold water. The VA was not just treating him, it was monitoring him. The aggressive medication protocols, the insistence on sedation, the psychiatric evaluation scheduled for dawn, it was not treatment. It was containment. They were not trying to heal his trauma. They were trying to ensure he never remembered the details of that explosion clearly enough to question the official report. Sarah checked her watch. "In 6 minutes, that sedation team is coming back with security. If they take you to the psychiatric ward, you will be transferred to a facility in West Virginia by dawn. Private facility, Obsidian Shield runs the security there. I have seen the intake records. Veterans enter. They do not leave the same." "How do you know this?" Marcus asked. His voice hard. "Because I worked there," she said, her voice breaking, "for 2 years under a different name. I saw the files, Marcus. Veterans who asked too many questions about their injuries. Blind soldiers who remembered too much about the explosions that took their sight. They do not cure them. They chemically restrain them until the memories fade or the patients stop being a problem. Marcus swung his legs off the bed, standing unsteady but determined. The heart monitor lay silent on the floor, its leads dangling like severed veins. "We need to leave. We cannot," Sarah said. "The building is on lockdown after your incident yesterday. No exits without badge clearance. And my badge was deactivated the moment I contradicted the chief of medicine in front of witnesses." He reached out, finding her shoulder in the darkness, gripping with the strength that had once made him a SEAL. "Then we do not use the exits. You said you were Sarah Mitchell in Kandahar. You said you knew how to save lives, but Sarah Mitchell died in a car accident in Germany 3 months after that surgery." "I read the casualty report when I was recovering in Bethesda." Sarah nodded slowly, tears finally falling in the dark. "Then who am I?" "You're the woman who kept me alive when I had no reason to live," Marcus said. "And right now, you are the only person in this building who knows how to get us out alive. So tell me, Sarah, if you're not a nurse and you're not a ghost, what are you?" She wiped her face, straightening her spine with the military precision he recognized from the battlefield. The tremor in her hands suddenly gone. "I am the last medic from Kandahar who still remembers what really happened. And if we do not move in the next 90 seconds, we are both going to disappear like the others." Sarah moved to the wall, fingers finding the seam of a maintenance panel. Behind the drywall, she revealed a narrow access corridor used for electrical runs, a pathway she had mapped during her 2 years working night shifts under her false identity. Marcus followed her voice, bare feet silent on the cold tile, his hand gripping her shoulder as she guided him through the darkness. The sedation team breached room 14 exactly 87 seconds later. But instead of a drugged patient and a compliant nurse, they found an empty bed, a disconnected heart monitor, and an open ventilation grate. The chief of medicine spoke into his radio with calm precision that no hospital administrator should possess. "Package is mobile. Activate building containment. Nightingale has made contact." Sarah heard the announcement echo through the corridor speakers as they crouched behind a laundry cart 3 floors below. Nightingale. The code name they had used for her in West Virginia. She had not escaped their notice when she quit the facility 2 years ago. She had been allowed to leave, tracked, cultivated, and finally led back to the one patient who mattered more than all the others combined. "It is not just about silencing witnesses," she whispered to Marcus in the darkness of the utility tunnel. "It is about what is inside you." Marcus touched the scars on his abdomen, the ridged tissue where Sarah had pulled shrapnel from his liver a decade ago. "The fragments?" "Not fragments," she said. "Evidence the defector your team was escorting. He had swallowed a data chip before capture. Obsidian Shield used a shaped charge designed to kill him and destroy the chip. But the blast pattern was wrong. The chip fragmented and embedded in the closest human tissue. Yours." Marcus went still. "You are saying I have been carrying classified intelligence in my body for 10 years? Serial numbers, manufacturing codes, bank transfers, enough to expose an illegal arms network that reaches the Pentagon. That is why they kept you alive in Kandahar when you should have died. That is why they have been trying to get you into their psychiatric facility, not to silence you, to cut it out of you." The realization landed like a physical blow. His blindness, his suffering, his decade of isolation, all of it had been preservation. He was not a patient. He was a storage device, and tomorrow morning's scheduled surgery to remove scar tissue was actually an extraction procedure. No anesthesia, no witnesses, just the removal of the last physical evidence linking Obsidian Shield to treason. Footsteps echoed above them, heavy boots, not hospital shoes. Sarah pulled Marcus deeper into the tunnel system, navigating by memory toward the medical records basement. If they could reach the old surgical logs, she could prove the shrapnel was never fully removed in 2014. She could prove the VA had known all along. They emerged into a sub-basement lined with filing cabinets and obsolete servers. Sarah punched a code into a keypad. An access code she should not have known, stolen from a drunken security chief during her time as Nightingale. The door clicked open, revealing a room that should not exist, a surveillance hub monitoring every room in the hospital, including theirs. Screens showed room 14 being searched by men in tactical gear wearing VA security badges. Another screen showed the rooftop helipad, where a black medical evacuation helicopter had landed without running lights, and on the central monitor, a live feed of the basement corridor they had just walked through. "They have been watching us the entire time," Marcus said, his blind eyes somehow sensing the electronic presence. Worse, Sarah said, pointing to a timestamp on the screen. They have been watching me for 10 years. The footage showed Sarah, different hair, different names, different cities, going about a life that she thought was hidden. Grocery shopping in Baltimore, nursing school graduation, her first day at this VA hospital, every moment documented, every escape route planned, every relationship monitored. She had never been free. She had been stored like Marcus, waiting for the moment when her value outweighed her risk. A voice crackled from a speaker in the ceiling. Nurse Chen, or should I say Mitchell? Or perhaps the name your mother gave you. Sarah looked up, recognizing the voice. The chief of medicine stood in the doorway behind them, no longer wearing his white coat, but a tactical vest with obsidian shield patches. He held no weapon. He did not need one. The door had sealed behind him, magnetic locks engaging with a thunk that vibrated through the floor. You brought him here, the man said, nodding toward Marcus. Exactly as we planned. We could never get him to West Virginia while he was violent. He needed to trust someone. He needed to want to escape. Marcus stepped in front of Sarah, his body remembering the protective instincts that had made him a SEAL. You wanted me to run? We wanted you to remember, the man said. The chip degrades. The data becomes corrupted if the host is sedated or chemically restrained. We needed you alert, angry. We needed the specific neurological activity that only occurs when a blind man uses his hands to identify someone he has not seen in a decade. Touch memory activates the hippocampus in ways that preserve the data integrity. You just performed the authentication sequence we needed. Sarah felt the floor tilt, the recognition in the room, the removal of the cardiac monitor. It had all been orchestrated. She had not saved Marcus. She had completed the circuit that made him valuable enough to harvest. But here's what you do not know. The man continued, pressing a button on his wrist. The defector was not carrying evidence against Obsidian Shield. He was carrying the only existing copy of the authorization order that created it, signed by the Secretary of Defense in 2013, and that chip is not in Marcus's abdomen anymore. Sarah looked at Marcus, confused. It is in yours, the man said to her. It transferred during the transfusion in Kandahar. You have been carrying it for 10 years. That is why you lived when the other medics died. You were the vault. He was just the key. Marcus reached out, finding Sarah's face in the darkness, his thumb tracing the tears on her cheek. Then they need us both, he said. And that means they cannot kill either of us until they have confirmation. The man smiled. Confirmation just completed. The authentication was not his touch. It was yours. The system recorded your pulse against his skin 90 seconds ago. The data unlocked the moment you admitted who you really were. Alarms blared, the magnetic locks released, and through the open door, Sarah saw the black helicopter's rotors beginning to turn on the rooftop, ready for extraction. Not of Marcus, of her. The chief raised his radio package, confirmed. Prepare for surgical extraction of Subject 2. Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand, pressing something cold and metal into her palm, a scalpel he had lifted from the trauma bay during their escape. If they want what is inside you, he whispered, then we give them something else first. The truth. And with the sound of boots thundering down the corridor, Sarah realized the only way to save them both was not to run, but to become the witness she had spent 10 years pretending not to be. She had to survive the surgery. She had to remember everything. And she had to make sure that when they opened her up, they found not just a chip, but a story that could not be silenced. This ends tonight, she said, gripping the scalpel, not in an operating room, but here, now, with you seeing for both of us? Marcus smiled grimly. Then let them come. I have been blind for 10 years. I do not need eyes to fight. I just need to know you're still holding my hand. The door burst open. But instead of surrender, Sarah did something no one in Obsidian Shield had predicted. She raised the scalpel not to attack, but to her own chest, pressing the blade against her sternum with enough pressure to draw blood. One step closer, she screamed, and I destroy the evidence. You want the chip? You keep us both alive. You give us the rooftop, and you give us 5 minutes on that helicopter's radio. The tactical team froze. The chief's face went pale. For the first time in a decade, Sarah Mitchell was not running. She was not hiding. She was negotiating with the devil, holding her own life as collateral, and betting everything on the fact that they needed her more than she needed to survive. Marcus stepped beside her, his empty eyes facing the armed men, his hand steady on her shoulder. You heard the lady, he said. Take us to the roof, or explain to your employers why you let 10 years of evidence bleed out on a basement floor." The chief lowered his radio slowly. "You do not understand what you're asking. If you go public, if that chip reaches the Department of Justice, then the war ends." Sarah finished. "The real one. The one you have been fighting against veterans in hospital beds. We are going to the roof, and you're going to watch us fly away, because for the first time in 10 years, the blind man and the ghost are going to see the sunrise together." The chief stares at the blood pooling on Sarah's scrubs, where the scalpel point breaks skin, calculates the odds and steps back. "Move," he snaps at his team. Now, they ascend the stairwell in a strange procession, tactical boots and bare feet echoing on concrete, Marcus gripping Sarah's shoulder as she walks backward, blade still pressed to her sternum, eyes never leaving the chief. The rooftop door opens to rotor wash in pre-dawn darkness, the black helicopter silhouetted against a graying sky. The pilot leans out as they approach, face hidden behind night vision goggles. "Harrison," Sarah breathes, recognizing the posture before the voice. The surgeon from Kandahar, 10 years older, 10 years underground, nods once. "Get in, both of you, now." The chief stops at the doorframe, his hand brushing Sarah's arm as she passes. "It was always supposed to end this way," he murmurs. "Tell them the truth." Then he turns and raises his rifle at his own men, buying them seconds with gunfire that cracks across the rooftop. They lift off as bullets spark against the skids. Inside the cabin is stripped medical bay and command center fused together, monitors showing hospital security feeds going dark one by one. Harrison pulls off his goggles, revealing scarred hands that once removed shrapnel from Marcus's abdomen a decade ago. He is looking at Sarah with professional assessment. "You're bleeding," he says. "Let me see. Not yet." She gasps, lowering the scalpel. "The chip. We need to extract it before they track the signal." Harrison exchanges a look with Marcus that Sarah cannot read. "There is no signal," Harrison says gently. "Because there is no chip in your chest. There never was." Sarah freezes. The chief lied. "It was a bluff to get us here." "It was a test," Marcus says quietly, his fingers finding her face again, tracing the line of her jaw with a certainty that has nothing to do with memory and everything to do with touch. "To see if you would sacrifice yourself for the data. But I felt it the moment you touched me in that room. The tremor in your hands, it is not fear. It is resonance." Harrison opens a reinforced case, removes a portable surgical scanner, and directs it toward Marcus's head. "The blast in Kandahar embedded fragments in your liver, yes. But the primary object, the data chip, traveled upward through the shrapnel wave. It is lodged in your optic nerve sheath. It has been there for 10 years, compressing the nerve, preventing any surgical attempt to restore your sight. The blindness was not permanent damage. It was physical obstruction. Sarah understands before he finishes. To get the data, we have to remove it. And if we remove it, you might see again," Harrison finishes, "or the nerve might sever completely. There is no anesthesia strong enough for this altitude. You would have to be awake." Marcus sits straighter on the gurney, his scarred hands gripping the metal frame. "Do it," he says. Sarah does the extraction. No one else touches me. They prepare with the rhythm of a field hospital. Sarah scrubbing her hands with antiseptic wipes. Harrison setting up the portable microscope and fiber optic camera. The helicopter banks hard, evading radar, but the cabin becomes a sterile bubble of concentration. Marcus lies back, and Sarah positions the magnifying loop over his right eye. "I remember this," she whispers. "Your hand in mine, the generator flickering. You told me you would see me again someday." "I lied," he says, smiling grimly. "I knew I was blind, but I wanted you to keep holding on." She makes the incision. The helicopter drops altitude suddenly, turbulence shaking the cabin, but her hand does not tremble. Not now. Not when the fiber optic screen shows the metallic glint embedded in white neural tissue. She extracts the object with microforceps, a bloody sliver no larger than a grain of rice, and drops it into the waiting analyzer. Harrison hits transmit. The data streams to 17 locations simultaneously. Department of Justice, Senate Intelligence Committee, encrypted journalist drops, the authorization order, the bank transfers, the names of the 3 senators and 2 four-star generals who created Obsidian Shield. It takes 11 seconds. As the confirmation pings light up the screen, Sarah turns back to Marcus. The wound in his orbital socket is already closing, the pressure released. She applies a dressing, her fingers lingering on his eyelids. "Open them," she says. It takes a moment. The muscles have not worked in a decade. But slowly, painfully, Marcus Kane opens his eyes. The first thing he sees is gray morning light through the helicopter window. The second is Sarah Chen, blood on her scrubs, tears on her face, holding his hand exactly as she did in a field hospital tent 10 years ago. He blinks, focusing the world, sharpening into impossible clarity. "You have a scar?" he says, his voice breaking. "Above your left eyebrow." "I felt it. I imagined it wrong." She laughs, sobbing, pressing her forehead to his. "You imagined it perfectly." Harrison clears his throat, pointing to the horizon where dawn is breaking over the Capitol. The dome of the Capitol building catching the first gold light. "They will be waiting at the landing zone," he says. "Protection detail, whistleblower protocols. You will both testify before the Select Committee tomorrow." Marcus does not look away from Sarah. "And after? Then you heal," she says. "We both do. In the light, not the dark." The helicopter descends toward the secure pad, but Sarah keeps her hand in Marcus's, maintaining the pressure, the specific touch that saved his life twice now, once in darkness and once in light. The data has been exposed. The conspiracy is unraveling across the city below them. But the story ends here, in this moment when a blind man finally sees the face of the woman who never let him go. The Select Committee hearings would last 6 months. 17 officials would resign, 3 would face prison, but that is bureaucracy, and this was something else entirely. When Sarah Chen walked into that room, she was not just breaking protocol, she was proving that the human hand remembers what the mind tries to forget, that a decade of silence cannot sever the connection between someone who saves a life and someone who refuses to let that life be wasted. That trust is not built in grand gestures, but in the specific pressure of fingers checking a pulse in the dark. Marcus Kane received the surgery to restore his full sight 3 weeks later. He saw the sunrise over the Atlantic, and he saw the woman beside him without the filter of memory or darkness. But more importantly, the VA hospitals changed. The psychiatric wards that had been used to silence inconvenient veterans were shut down. The chips stopped being implanted. The war that had been fought in shadows against America's own wounded finally saw light, exposed by a nurse who chose to remember when everyone else was paid to forget, and by a soldier who refused to stop looking for her, even in darkness. Yet the question remains haunting in its implications. How many Sarah Mitchells are still out there? Nurses, medics, corpsmen who hold the keys to secrets they do not even know they carry, walking among us in ordinary scrubs, hiding extraordinary pasts. How many patients sit in sterile rooms right now, believing they are forgotten, discarded, invisible, when someone somewhere still remembers the exact pressure of their pulse, the specific tremor of their hands, the life they saved in a field hospital tent a decade ago? If this story reminded you that the quietest hands often hold the heaviest truth, if it made you believe that no one is truly invisible to the right person, then stay with us. Subscribe not for the algorithm, but for the next story that proves we are still connected in ways we cannot always see. The next time you meet someone whose hands tremble, ask yourself what they might be holding. And remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply not let go.